Michael with United Veterans Worldwide for an interview this morning. It's a Monday morning, and I'm excited to meet with Ash today. She is a person that I found on Instagram probably a month and a half ago now. I came across a post that I'll talk about here in a little bit that was impactful enough for me to want to bring her onto this channel. She's got an amazing personality. It shows through on her Instagram account. I'll link all of that in the description below, but let's get in and learn a little bit about Ash herself. So Ash, I'll turn it over to you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so hello. I am 29. I'm a mom. I was married. I have two little boys. I currently do social media on the side, and I actually work part-time for another brand doing their social media too. So I'm very familiar with social media. I actually owned a company before for 3 years, and I just sold that company this year, which was really fun. And yeah, no, I'm just hanging out.
That's great. What was the business that you sold? What did you do? Was it a social media business or?
It grew on social media really big. It was Ava Gowns. I designed dresses, and it ended up going viral on TikTok back in 2021 or something. And I did it for 3 years and grew it to a really good spot. And I just didn't want to do it anymore, so I sold it.
No kidding. Well, that's amazing. I had no idea. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk to the group here about what this post was that I saw that was so influential. And when I've done other interviews on this channel, we've really talked to other people about their trauma in the military, sometimes combat, sometimes non-related to combat, that has kind of gotten veterans worldwide kind of stuck in this hole, of depression, anxiety, whatever, and it's been really hard for some veterans to move forward from this. And so when I saw Ash's post, her post was kind of describing some of her early childhood experiences of some trauma, and then leading her in a spiritual journey through different phases to where she is today. And Ash, maybe you can kind of take us back a little bit in time and walk us through some of what that story was, if you're comfortable.
Yeah, so I was born in Russia in a city called Vladivostok, and I was in the orphanage. My mom could not afford me. She was 16 years old, and she ended up giving me away to the orphanage. I found out later in life that she did come back when I was 2, but I was already gone. But I ended up going to a home in Utah and just going into a family that just was very abusive. And I just dealt with that for pretty much most of my life from a young age until I was probably about 12. I would say 12. It was very physical and emotional. And when I got older, it was more verbal and just more like messing with the brain, like narcissistic things. And then I was able to move out when I was 18. I served a mission for my church, which is kind of when I found out that I was abused in really horrible ways. And that kind of brought light. I kind of like shoved it away for a little bit. I came home. I ended up getting married pretty fast and having a kid about a year later. And when I had the kid, that's kind of when everything just came up. And I just like, oh, wow. Like, and I feel like that happens a lot to young moms and stuff. And so now I'm still healing. I feel like I'm still on that healing journey because I feel like it is just a lot to heal from, but I'm in such a better spot. And I've realized that like there are so many people out there who are in the same spot as me, but they can still move forward and not let your abusers or whoever, kind of like control you still. Because for me, it was like I would wake up and just hate my life so much. And I realized that it was just like I was just letting them control me still. Like, and even like getting on here, I was so panicked. I've been so panicked all day. Like, oh, like just yesterday, my sister called and was like, Mom and Dad found out that you've been sharing about your story online. And I immediately just like, my heart was just like, I'm in trouble. I'm like gonna have like all these bad things happen to me. And I have to like step back and be like, no, I'm a 29-year-old adult and I'm sharing what happened to me. And if they didn't want me to share about this, they shouldn't have done it in the first place.
Right.
So.
Right. I think that there's an element of courage that you're displaying here today for us that's so noble. you mentioned having these hard experiences, serving a mission for the same faith that you and I both are. You came home, got married, and had a child. And in that situation where you've gone through child labor, hormonal changes, something in there triggered memories to realize all the trauma that you'd undergone. This is not dissimilar to maybe even my journey coming out of combat in Iraq, leaving the military injured. I had my whole shoulder replaced. I had to readjust to everything I was doing physically, and then I got a job where everything slowed down, and this tidal wave of trauma just washed over me, and I related a lot to almost drowning, because it was so heavy. I thought I was grounded. I felt like I was secure in who I was. I had family support. But trauma can can just swallow a person. So, in a way, I can relate to what you have felt. And I interviewed a buddy of mine 2 weeks ago on here, and he was very open about some of his trauma and suicidal ideations and maybe some attempts, and it was a very heavy conversation. I love the guy. He's gone through a hellacious journey, and he mentioned to me, just like you just did, Ash, that you had some anxiety built up before you come on to meet with me, because all of this kind of triggers and it comes back and you just wonder. And he did the same thing. But I fast forward another week and I talked to my buddy Marcus and I said, "Hey, how you doing, brother? Like, I know you talked about a lot of heavy stuff. How are you?" And he's like, afterwards it was really difficult. He says, but then I watched the interview again and I was like, I was feeling better about it. And sometimes it helps when we talk about our trauma and we then get better at dealing with it, especially if it still has a triggering effect,
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm a little bit confused. So if we go back to your family, why would they adopt or and then mistreat? Were they mistreating the other kids as well?
So, no. Well, yes and no. So they had a biological daughter, and they were older when they got married. My dad was divorced, and then my mom was married when she was like 38 or 39. And so they had my sister, who's their biological daughter, and they couldn't have any more kids because my mom was so old. And so they decided that they wanted to adopt. And I believe they've told me they wanted to adopt from like China or something, but they couldn't. And so it ended up being Russia. But no, when we came back, I was actually adopted with my brother, not blood related, just another boy in the orphanage who's now my brother. And both of us had the grunt of the abuse. My sister had very little. I can't say she didn't have any, because just watching the abuse is abuse to me. And I think just putting your child in that situation is just sickening just as much as doing it to them.
Yeah.
But yeah, me and my brother definitely got the horrible abuse. And I've always wondered the same thing. And I've even asked them, like, why would you spend so much money on flying to Russia, adopting these kids? In total, they told me it was like around $25K per person. So $50K, right? That's a lot of money.
It is a lot.
To just come back and just put these poor kids through torture. And it's so funny that you are like working with veterans and stuff, because when I would talk to therapists about my abuse, they were like, the abuse that your mom did was like how they torture soldiers. Like it's very tactful. Like, so they like, there's nothing just going to really show on your body. Like you can't go and report it, but it's like, it's so psychologically damaging. Most of them are honestly just shocked that I was a normal person. They're like, you should literally be in like a psychiatric ward for what you've been through. And so, yeah, it's just, to me, it's just crazy. I don't know what there is. And for me, I look back and I feel really bad for my dad. He went through an extremely hard childhood. He was beat so many times and he just had a really rough life, and I look back now that I'm older, I'm like, maybe he was autistic. Like, for sure, my parents, they cannot be there mentally just to do the things. And I don't know if like you want me to go into detail of like my abuse or whatever, but
you decide, Ash.
Just the things that they did, it's just like, no one in their right mental state of mind can do those things. Like,
Yeah.
it's really insane. Yeah. Like, I could give some examples, I
Yeah.
guess. Like, a huge, oh, what is the word? Like, a huge thing that we just saw was, like, Jody Hildebrandt and the ones in Utah, right? Their abuse story. I listened to that and I was just like, man, if they went to prison, my parents should be in prison. Like, 100%. Even my husband's like, this just shows like the horribleness. But as far as abuse goes, I can give a little, there's a lot, but as far as what they would make me do, like, and most of it, when I say they, it was usually my mom. My dad never stood up for me a ton, but it would be like they would call it like cold showers, and they'd call it bucket power. They're two different things. And what they would do is, from a very young age, they would make us strip down naked and lay in the bathtub, and they would turn the cold water on all the way cold and make us lay down so the water was just above our faces and we couldn't breathe. Like waterboarding. It was pretty much all of these are waterboarding. So we'd be there for like an hour every day, just like trying to breathe. I don't know why. I don't know what that taught. But also then afterwards, it would be like it's so hard to explain, but we'd have like, oh, we were so bad. So then you have like this many minutes here. And then after it'd be like bucket power, which was still in the bathtub naked, except for my mom would pour cold water of like a 5-gallon bucket over our heads so I couldn't breathe. And we just lay there. And depending on how bad we were that day, it would be up to like 30 buckets.
What?
It sounds insane now that I'm older, but like, yeah, we would just lay there and she just pour buckets over our head and we couldn't breathe and we just would have to hold our breath and wish for the best, like it was very crazy. And yeah, so like I'm saying, just really crazy things. And afterwards, it would be like everything to my mom was a privilege. You had to earn everything in life. And I didn't really get to earn a lot of things because apparently I wasn't that good of a child. But it would be like, your bed is a privilege. So I spent a lot of time sleeping in the garage, sleeping outside, sleeping in a cold bathhouse. And I was just talking to my sister the other day when she talked about my parents, and she was like, yeah, I remember you guys like sleeping outside. It was like winter. And I'd just be like, I hope they don't freeze to death out there. It's like below zero. And we're just like little kids, like I would say 4, to like 12, like little kids. And I have a 6-year-old and I think about it and I'm just like, man, in my worst moments, I want to yell at my kid. I don't want to torture my kids. Like it's the things that I went through is just insane. And like I was told that like sometimes in the war back then with soldiers, they would just lock the soldiers up in rooms. They couldn't do anything. It was just pitch black or whatever. And psychologically, they would do this to like spill their secrets. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And my mom would do that to us. Like she would make me stay. We had a garage closet where there's no lights because it's a garage. In these closets for days, we just stand there. And if she came and checked on us and we weren't standing, we'd have to stay there longer. And so we would just sit there as little kids standing in a pitch black closet, hours, days, just sitting there like all night, just like hoping, I don't know, be good enough to get out,
It turns my stomach. It is that disgusting. You mentioned that other lady. What was her name again? You mentioned the story that broke in Utah, southern Utah.
Oh, Jody Hildebrandt. And I don't remember the mom's name. I can't remember.
Yeah. So they did very similar things, making them kneel down on sand so that over time the sand would just get into the pores and burn, and just some crazy torture stuff. So it does sound very familiar to some of the training that I've gone through, where I was in what they would call like a prisoner of war training, so that I would be adjusted for special operations to go out in small teams, and if I was ever captured. It sounds very much like that. Like it's not just psychological. There's physical elements to it, right? Cold, breathing, rest. I hope they didn't withhold food from you, but if you had to earn everything, there's probably some of that too. But that is nightmarishly torturous. A little bit about my background. My father grew up in California, His dad was a veteran of World War II, not mentally stable, abused all of his kids, and they had 9 children, physically, emotionally, mentally. My dad met my mom. My mom came from a neglected household. And both of these people come together abused in their own individual lives. But for some reason, they were able to raise my brother, my sister, and myself, not perfectly, but in a home where there was love, where there was, desire to progress, to do good. My mom used to always say, like, I love love. She would say this, but she came from a place of abuse, and so did my dad. And it could have been so different. What I tell you that story is that there is zero excuses for the people you call parents to put children through that type of abuse. No matter what their previous experiences were, they still had a choice. They still knew what a right and wrong was. And so, Ash, you've walked us through some of this unjustifiable, inhumane torture of children. And I know there's always a part of someone who's gone through some trauma try to justify for the opposite person. Well, they must have, they could have, they probably had it hard themselves. And in reality, there's zero justification. You are the victim. You've had others oppress you in a way that could have been so defeating mentally, and maybe at times it was. But what I see on your social media account, and I know that social media doesn't always portray what reality is for us, right? Like, some of my hardest days, my wife says to me, like, Michael, grab your selfie stick, go outside and walk around, and tell people what you're feeling today. Tell people that your mind isn't working as well, or tell them that you're depressed, or whatever. Like, tell them the bad stuff as well as the days you want to smile on camera too. So this is your day, Ash, to kind of tell us how you've gone from this experience of psychological warfare, is what I would call it, to a place where you're able to serve a mission. Did the mission time, I know that can be a time of stress, it's hard work. Did it reveal things to you?
So when I was 15, I was in a car accident with one of my best friends, and he ended up dying. He was ejected from the car. Oh. And at that point, I was already going through so much crap with my family. Like, that's the same. It was all happened when I was 15. I was a freshman. That same time period, my parents publicly kicked me out of student council because I sloughed class to go to my friend who just died, his house, to be with his friends. Anyway, there's just so then my mom sent me literally to juvenile jail because it was just ridiculous for a whole week. That same week I was supposed to run track, cross country. I'm actually a very good runner. I was supposed to run varsity as a freshman for state. And of course my mom was like, nope, you suck. So you're going to go to jail instead. So that kind of got there's just so much stuff. And so when I was a freshman, I went through, I want to say, some of the hardest times. And when my best friend died, it literally just knocked me off. And I was just like, okay, I've got to figure out my life, because I felt like I was just dying inside. My sister at the time was saying she had depression and all my parents cared about was her, when I just literally watched my best friend die, in a car accident, and all I cared about was her, which was very normal. And so for me, that was when everything clicked for me. I was just like, you know what, I have to rely on people who I can rely on, and the only person I can rely on is God. Mm-hmm. And that was just I for the first time read the Book of Mormon when I was 15, about a few months later. And at that time, I knew, and I just promised myself I was going to serve a mission, because I just had the feeling that whatever I was going through, there's no way out but without God, So at 15, I gained a really strong testimony, which has carried me my entire life.
Love it.
And so as soon as I turned 18, I put my papers in. I got called on a mission, and there were some issues going with that. Like my sister was getting married and they actually called me and they wanted me to go earlier and I couldn't because my mom basically wouldn't let me. And I was like, oh man, I just want to get out of here. But I went to the MTC. My call did get switched. I ended up serving the Baltics when I was originally called to Russia. And the mission was wonderful. Like obviously missions are kind of hard, but compared to what I was used to living and the fear that I was living, it was like a breath of fresh air. Like I'm already very obedient from, being afraid of getting abused all the time. So the rules were nothing to me. It was just like amazing. Like my mission, I know some people look at their missions and missions are really hard. But I just loved it. I loved just doing everything for God, waking up, serving, just preaching all the time. So that was really just amazing. And it was on my mission actually that I really just kind of started to just get like a seed planted of like how bad my abuse was, because during the time my companion was having a hard day and I was like, oh yeah, what's wrong? And she was like, well, I was abused by my father. And I was like, oh, that's terrible. Like what happened? And she was like, sometimes he'll yell at me, and sometimes he would just like grab my arm firmly and like pull me to my room and stuff. And in my head, I was like, yeah, that sucks. Like, that's not nice. It's, you don't want to yell, you don't want to do those things. But in my head, I was just thinking, wow, like I sure had it really bad. Like, and I didn't say anything. I didn't want to make her feel bad or invalidate who she, like what she was feeling, because that's valid. And I ended up talking to the therapist to talk about her at first, my companion, to be like, how can we help her? And then I ended up kind of just like talking to him about my life, and I was like, hey, like she mentioned that she was like abused, and he was like, yeah, like she said that she had a problem with her dad, like da da da. And I was like, oh, okay. And I was like, well, and I started to kind of just give like little examples of like, okay, well, my parents like did this, and I'm like, so like that means that I was abused too. And his eyes were just like, he literally asked me, why are you here? And I was like, because I love God and I love Christ and I like want to serve. And he's like, no, but how are you here? And I was like, what do you mean? And he was like, I have worked with people like with your stories. And he's like, they can't get out of bed. They're like in like mental like places, and they're really messed up. And I was like, oh, well, yeah, I don't know. Like I just, to me, like that was the first time I was kind of just like, oh, well, maybe what I went through was bad, but my therapist there was just like, you can't think about this. It's going to ruin your whole mission. He's like, put it on the back burner. He's like, I usually don't tell people to. He's like, but put it on the back burner. He's like, finish your mission strong. Like, and I did. And I forgot about it for a while, and I came home, I got married, and then more of it just kind of started to come out from then, because my husband started to see how my parents would treat me so poor compared to everyone else, and he would just be like, yeah, that's kind of like weird, and then I just had kids, and it just came out. And I don't even remember what your question was. I'm so sorry.
No, I think that's you're already talking about it. Where you said you served in the Baltics. Is that like Kosovo and?
No, it's so right underneath Finland. So Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, and Belarus.
Okay, too. Places I've never been.
Yeah, no one goes there. They're really small, forgetful countries. Oh,
I guess that symbol with my hands makes balloons. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
That's funny. No, so what you started to talk about is the journey that you had, where you had self-discovery on a mission. You started to realize and understand that there had been abuse that had taken place. You progressed. So, and this is a personal question. I can always cut it out later. But marriages aren't easy. Marriages take work, right? It's like trying to get along with your companion on the mission all the time, right? It's challenging. So how in your marriage have you been able to take out that psychological abuse and trust?
Oh, it's still pretty hard. I mean, my husband actually came from an abuse, not as like severely abusive, but his mom was very narcissistic and crazy. So we both kind of come from, same things. And I think for us it's obviously not perfect, but communication is just like, we've learned to just be so honest and just be like, hey, like, I'm really triggered right now with the kids. So like, you better step in, or like, cause like, I don't want to do things that I regret, or like, he'll be like, I need a break. I have to go take a walk, and obviously it's not perfect, and we still fight, and we still get triggered a lot, and we're still working through things because we still are like discovering ourselves and everything. But I would say it's honestly not as bad as what I thought, because I feel much safer in this relationship than I have in all my other relationships, because they've been so screwed up and messed up, so.
Yeah. No, I salute you for that. And you talk about this journey of wellness where you're still working through things with your spouse at the same time. And that's the advice I would give to this global audience today. If you're continuing to struggle with some of the trauma that occurred in a combat or non-combat related environment, and you're finding yourself stuck, I want us to look to this example of Ash. That obviously she's told us this amazing story that is so sad for a child. If I put myself in that scenario, it just breaks my heart. But she's able to come and find some light, and then with that light, continue this journey. And the trajectory isn't like this; it's like this. It's like this. It just keeps moving upward, and that is the message that I hope, Ash, that I hope more and more people take away, is that yes, life can suck. It can produce some really rough experiences for us. And yet, from the dirt, we can have flowers, right? We can still grow, we can still blossom. And I'm so glad that you've been able to share that. So you've taken that, and where did you develop this entrepreneurial desire? I mean, was it born out of a need to express yourself when you weren't able to for so long?
It could be a lot of things, honestly, and some of it I don't even know if it's necessarily healthy. But I think I base a lot of my like success and stuff is by like making money and like being like, I don't know. I just I feel like I have to be doing things that are successful to make myself feel better about myself, which, like I said, isn't the best thing. Which is why I quit, because I knew that I wasn't feeling fulfilled enough. And from what I'm doing now, which is more inspiring, more healthy, helping people, I feel like so much better. Like, you could ask my husband, he's like, yeah, you seem so much happier than when you were doing that, and I do believe that because of what I went through, I do have like extra resilience, and I do have like extra traits that, maybe I wouldn't have if I didn't go through it, where I am very like strong and I push through things, and I work really hard because I was trained to work really hard as a kid,
Yeah.
So I would say that, but in the end of the day, I don't know. I just,
Well, I think additionally you developed this deep empathy for other people, right? Like you tell us this story about talking with your companion who feels like she was abused, and maybe she was mistreated rather than abused, but
yeah.
Either way, you didn't discount it and say, toughen up, girl. Like, that's nothing. The empathy that you were showing her obviously carries forward today too. And I don't know any other way. And I'll just tell a quick experience. Before I went into the Army, I was already in the Navy. I'd already done a bunch of things. I hadn't deployed yet. I crossed over from the Navy into the Army because I watched a movie, Hotel Rwanda, about the genocide in Rwanda, and it was a horrible movie. But I also felt like, man, I could make a difference somewhere in the world still. So I joined the Army and was soon deployed to Iraq. I got an answer to prayer that said I was supposed to, go and do this stuff. Came home from Iraq, had all this trauma from combat and seeing death. And then moved into a special operations type of a role in civil affairs, deployed again. This time I was in Africa, and I actually went to Rwanda and had all these wonderful experiences. But when I started to struggle, I wondered, like, wait a second, where was God in all of this? I felt like I was on the right path. How did it turn into some of this trauma? But like I was trying to say, you can't develop that empathy. You can't develop that outward projection to help other people if you haven't gone through some stuff yourself and said, this can be overcome, this can be worked through, now I can apply this to somebody else. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
it's a hard thought mentally, because I'm like, man, I really wish I didn't have to go through all of those years of struggle and what my family had to go through with my anger or frustrations or depression or whatever. But I hope that now on this journey that there's a trajectory like this for me too, that says, there's a new Michael, there's a new Ash, and this new version of us can be better than the older one as well, and say, yeah, we can make a difference in the world. Yeah. Ash, as we close up this interview here, the last couple of minutes, you've shared with us some amazing things, and I honestly feel like there should be some legal consequences for your abusers. Obviously, the other story that broke in southern Utah was people are going to prison. It's just not the way any child should be treated. But what advice can you provide to my global audience today as we talk about trauma and triumph?
I would just say, for me, I would just really just never forget the worth, like, of who you are. I think it's so important to understand that even though you are going through, either you went through this or you are going through this, that you're still such an amazing person, and that abuse maybe puts characteristics and traits kind of into who you are, but it's not defining you, and you can take something and make it good. Like, I believe that all things can be made good, which sometimes is a hard pill to swallow, because there are some horrific things going out there in the world that people have to suffer through daily, and it's hard to say, oh, those can be made good, but it's not the situation that's good, it's the outcome of what you do with that, like what you choose to do with the abuse and what you choose to do with your history and, the life that you were given. It's what you choose to do with it that makes it good. And for me, it's just like knowing that God loves you despite everything. I've felt the same way of like going through really hard times and like really dark times. So sometimes I just sit there at night and just be like, man, I can't imagine like just me doing these things to my kids. Like it would just make me sick at night. I just couldn't sleep, and I just have nightmares all the time about my parents coming and like getting me. It was horrible.
Yeah.
Or like, for example, I go to the dentist, and my dad pulled out my teeth when I was a kid, just with pliers. And it's really hard for me to go to the dentist and sit there and and just like normal everyday things that should not be a big deal. Going to the dentist, you're supposed to go every 6 months, it's not. But for me, it's like I go there and I can't, and people are like, well, where is God then? Where is God when you didn't do anything and now you're still having to suffer after? And and I think that it's just not necessarily, I think we're just asking ourselves the wrong question sometimes, of like, instead of like, where's God? It's just like, no, sometimes people just have agency and they use it the wrong way, and that is what happens. But it doesn't mean that God is abandoning us and he's leaving us, because I think everyone in this world could say that God has abandoned them. I've felt that way so many times, but when I look back, it's like, no, these things are what have made me stronger and have what made me rely on God even more. Like if you think about super successful people, they don't rely on anybody but themselves. They have everything they need. They don't need anything. But when you are put in these hard situations, you have to rely on somebody else other than yourself. And that's what God wants. God doesn't want you to suffer, I don't think, but he knows that is going to turn you towards him. And I feel like that is how my life has been. It's like so many times of just like turning towards him constantly, and so enough times, and I realized, you know what, you're right. I can't do anything without him. Everything that I do, everything that I have been given, everything that I'm good at, everything that I've accomplished, I just like, it's all God. And I give him all the glory for everything, and I feel like that's just what we have to do with the hard things too, is just hand it over.
What an incredible message. What an incredible message. I salute you. Your journey was tough, and you are doing some great things, and thank you for coming on and sharing this journey with us. And for anyone out there who's been triggered by some of the things that have been talked about today, I want to encourage you to find a healthy coping mechanism, stay away from the alcohol, try to do something that's productive. Get outside, get outside in the sun, get in the grass with your feet. Do something that grounds you and makes you remember who you are. And remember, like Ash just mentioned, so important is that you do have worth. You have a worth, regardless of what's happened to you, or even things that you may have done. There is some worth there that's worth capitalizing on and moving forward. So as we continue this wellness journey today, please like, subscribe, and share. And Ash, again, thanks very much for your time today. You're an amazing person, entrepreneur, and I hope more people can follow your journey and see all the good things that you accomplish and people you help.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for sharing your story too. I loved hearing about it.
Okay, thank you, Ash.